open wide.
Ready?
Here comes your chunk of Trump.
It's my favorite food.
With your first bite, here's Mark Thompson.
I have a feeling it's going to be beautiful.
The co-editor-in-chief at Variety is a guy named Ramin Sedure. Spent a lot of time interviewing former President Trump for his new book about The Apprentice. Sedure appeared on various cable outlets and talking about his new book, Apprentice in Wonderland, how Donald Trump and Mark Burnett took America through the looking glass. After describing the access that he's had to Trump, he's had apparently quite extraordinary access and spent many hours with Trump speaking. He talked about the fact that Donald Trump was bragging about the fact that he has a great memory and that Joe Biden should take a cognitive test because Donald Trump, has taken one. He says, I took a cognitive test, this is Trump speaking, and I aced it. He referred to the doctor who administered the cognitive test as Ronnie Johnson. The doctor's name who administered the cognitive test for memory, the test that Trump aced, is Ronnie Jackson, not Ronnie Johnson.
What?
Yeah, so just saying for a guy who, look, I'm not saying you couldn't make that mistake. I would make it, but I also wouldn't precede that mistake by going, I've got the best memory of anyone who's ever lived. I aced the exam. Biden should take it. So it is shocking, actually, he says, how little the former president remembers and how many gaps there are and how diminished he is in terms of his own mental acuity. This is according to the guy who spoke with him for hours for this new book. This is Donald Trump we're talking about, not Joe Biden. The other thing is that he spent the most time with Donald Trump of any journalist who has spent time speaking with him.
Well, of course, because it was for a book that was supposed to make him look good, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The book was supposed to make him look good, and they spent an hour together in 2021, in May. Then a few months later, he went back to the White House, same journalist. I went back to Trump Tower to talk to him about his time in the White House. And he had this vacant look on his face, Donald Trump did. And I said, do you remember me? And he said, no.
Oh, oops.
He had no recollection of our lengthy interview that we had. This is the quote continuing. And he wasn't doing a lot of interviews at that time. So I think that the American public, this is him continuing, I think that the American public really need to see the portrait of Donald Trump because this shows what he is like and who he is and who he has always been. Mm-hmm. So there's that.
Now,
meantime, yes,
I wonder, does he not remember the journalist because his memory is going? Or does he not remember the journalist because it was never really about the journalist and Donald Trump doesn't really pay attention to anyone but himself? You know?
I think it's the latter, to be honest, when he talks about, because this shows what he is like and who he is and always been.
Sure.
It's that is, everything's really superficial. He'll pretend he connects with you, but he really doesn't.
No.
The other thing that is interesting and scary, and it's happening in increasing ways, and you'll see what I mean in a moment, is the power that a potential Trump presidency has over a lot of different situations that would probably shake out differently were it not for the fear that Donald Trump will ascend to power and then begin this process of revenge, right? He could be vengeful in any number of ways. We talk about the Justice Department, but it could be the IRS. There are any number of them. You know what happened with those FBI agents? They were tagged in IRS audits, and David K. Johnson, who knows a lot about that world, said there's just no way randomly those FBI agents end up in that audit. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. It would be, like winning the lottery and getting bitten by a shark on the same day kind of thing. Well, there's a new movie, and it's called The Apprentice. And it's about the relationship between Roy Cohn and a young Donald Trump. You see it there. On the left is the Roy Cohn character, and on the right, obviously, the young Donald Trump character. It got a standing ovation and great reviews when it premiered at Cannes last month. It's a story of a mentor and his protege, chronicling how Trump first learned from and then later surpassed the Roy Cohn Machiavellian fixer that was his mentor. The performances apparently are extraordinary. The guy on the left that you see there, if he looks familiar to you, that's Jeremy Strong from Succession. And apparently, and Strong is one of those actors who immerses himself in a role. He really captures the reptilian menace that Roy Cohn was. And he also apparently gives the role tremendous emotion as Roy Cohn wastes away. You know, Roy Cohn died of AIDS or complications from AIDS. So, but there are a lot of other important performances apparently, and Sebastian Stan, who plays Trump, makes Trump, they suggest, more human. They don't, in other words, not the cartoonish version of Trump that we've seen. So it's not a sympathetic portrayal I've been reading. It's a movie that depicts Trump in any kind of compromising situation, some of which can be aggressive with sexual assault and this kind of thing. But there's also the glamour of the Trump world before he became this cartoon. So why do I mention it here? Because it's likely we'll never see it.
Why?
And the reason we'll never see it, even though it, as I've just described, and I just kind of gave you a broad stroke on it, is very well done and well put together and well executed, is because distributors in this country are worried about revenge from a guy who actually may be president, Donald Trump. Negotiations are ongoing, and domestic distribution could still come together, but the possibility that The Apprentice may not be seen in America is extraordinary. And it, to me, represents another level of intimidation that we saw in the last administration.
Well, if you have people reacting out of fear already and the guy's not even in power, right? Imagine what happens when if he comes to power again. I mean, here you have people censoring movies and art already. Crazy.
The reality is we've seen Trump, and I just mentioned with the FBI agents and the IRS, but there's also a Vindman who, you'll remember testified before Congress, and then he was X'd out before his retirement kicked in. It's pretty brutal what the Trump people and Trump himself, it's pretty brutal what they do to those who they feel wronged by. But here is what's happening in this case. And I do want to be fair to this question, because you could say, well, political films sometimes struggle to get an audience. I believe was it the Adam McKay movie, Vice? That really didn't do that well. It was about Dick Cheney and George Bush. So you could say that there's some built-in reluctance there. But talking to people around Hollywood, it does seem as though mostly the world of Hollywood, already struggling a bit these days with streaming, et cetera, they're worried about taking on not just Trump. You understand? It's not just worrying about revenge from Donald Trump himself or his people in the White House or in a new Trump administration. It's worrying about MAGA and the MAGA faithful and how they'll create a kind of pushback on this movie and all of the movies that come from whatever distributor actually takes on this film. So the heavy lifting associated with getting a stink on a company is done by MAGA. It's like what they did to Bud Light. You know, it's a weird new aspect of the American culture. So again, they don't want to end up in MAGA crosshairs, these companies, like Disney and Bud Light, and it's likely or very possible that we won't see this also because of regulators. Remember, a new administration would have power over mergers, and increasingly, Hollywood is doing the merger thing, right? AT&T, and Time Warner. And you need government approval for mergers like that. And if you're associated with distributing a film that disparages the former president, Donald Trump, you may not get that merger. It's a scary aspect and ripple effect of the MAGA movement. Steve Bannon talks about a plan to target journalists for saying anything uncomplimentary about Trump, talking about Trump lies about the stolen 2020 election. He said, quote, "We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." It's in that environment that even though Europe and European distributors pick up this movie, The Apprentice, American distributors and American audiences may never pick it up. And that is your chunk of Trump.
That's it for this edition.
Well, I really enjoyed it.
But make sure to join us again next time
I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening.
for another chunk of Trump.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.